Good evening, everyone, and this is your Srija Santanam, Community Manager at DCKAP. And it's happy to meet you all at this event. And I hope like everyone is safe and staying at home during this lockdown. And first of all, I would like to thank everyone for registering to Magento Master Virtual Series Episode 7. So, DCCAP has been progressively organizing Magento meetups for past 5 years. So, COVID-19 has impacted the global economy like never before. So, while many are expecting life to return to normalcy and businesses start functioning as usual, the situation is still flocked around with uncertainties. That said, like we are looking for some means to organize a meetup to reach the Magento community. And our idea was to rope in Magento masters and ask them to share their insights with people across the globe through virtual meetup. Our first virtual meetup happened in April, 2 months ago, and it was indeed a great success. That spirit made us think, why not facilitate such meetups frequently? Until now, we have hosted like episodes of Magento Master, and this is our seventh webinar in the series. And we have Sandra Mangel, our 3x Magento Master, 2016, 17, 18, a series of 3 years, and he have won the Magento Master title. And he's here along with us to share his insights on closing the circle of quality on Magento projects. And thank you so much, Sandro, for joining us for today for our session. And it's my duty to give a small intro about the speaker of our event, Sandra Mangal. And he is a freelance e-commerce solution architect working for merchants and agencies across the globe. And he has an extensive track record in tackling complex enterprise level projects, building teams around projects, and adapting new technologies such as PWA into e-commerce projects. So, all that said, I don't want to hold off you guys from hearing out the captivating session by a wonderful speaker lined up for today evening. I'm sure that you will have a great learning experience today. And over to you, Sandra, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'll share my screen to go over to the slides. I hope you can all see my screen. So when you asked me to come up with a talk for this meetup, I didn't want to come up with something standard. I didn't want to come up with something about code. I wanted to do something that is very dear to me, which is normally something very boring, quality assurance. But I found that if it's done right, it makes clients happy, it makes me happy, it makes everyone involved in a project happy. I also found that quality assurance isn't just writing your unit tests and having someone check on mobile devices if the website looks good. It's about a lot more. So that's what I want to talk about today. So I had the introduction slide. I don't think I need to do that anymore. Thank you so much for introducing me. So quality assurance. Like I said, most of you will think about unit testing, manual testers. And I'm very happy that quality assurance and testing in general is being a hot item in the Magento community, because I think it was definitely something that was sorely lacking in our community for a long time, especially in the early days of Magento 1. You kind of, went at it, throw it into production and hope it doesn't break. But it's not just unit testing and manual testing. There is much more to testing. There are certain steps that you need to do in order to make a circle of quality assurance, from the first time that a concept was conceived up to the point where you start to deliver. You need to close a circle and make sure that everybody is on board with the way testing is done. So to do that, today we'll look at a couple of steps that should entail this quality assurance. The first one is getting the requirements right, making sure that the client is conveying correctly what they want to have. I think that one is very important. The second one is the right way to report bugs. Even if you have issues, there is a way to give those details to the developer or the team that's going to fix them. Then I want to look at the tools we use during development, which can not only detect bugs, but also prevent them, especially from going into production. I think that's the most important thing. Then we'll talk a bit about automated testing, code review, one of the most important parts of a project if it's up to me. We'll talk about front-end testing, handing it over to the client. Once you are done, don't just throw it at the client, make sure that they know what to expect. And of course, we'll talk a bit about catching regressions. So let's start with getting the requirements right. Often what I see in projects, and I used to be a developer, I still do a little bit of development, but by now I'm more architect, let's say it. So what I see often is that when clients come to me at first, their requirements are super vague. They know they want something. Often they want a copy of Amazon or some other giant store or whatever, but they don't know exactly what they want. So it's up to us to make sure that we start to make these requirements more solid. So one of those ways to do that is to make sure that it's more measurable, for example, but also to discover knowledge which for the client is obvious knowledge, because we should know about his tire business or his, I don't know, car lubrication products, right? Why wouldn't we know that they only come in 1 liter batches? Why did we make that mistake? So these are issues that for the client lead to bugs, while we are like, okay, we didn't know that. So a couple of things that we need to look at when we want to make certain we get the requirements right. First, make them quantifiable. Often I hear words such as easier, right? It should be easier to check out, or it feels slow, or make it more pop, or whatever. Or the admin user should be able to do this with 1 click. But what we want to do is make sure that things are very quantifiable and that we have the right description on how things should be easier or slower. If it feels slow, why is that? Is that because the time to first byte takes too long? Or is that because the images were loading slow? Or maybe simply because it takes a lot of time before we can actually interact with the web shop. So we push the client to be very specific in the way they describe things. And then next, when it comes to requirements, we want to focus on the changes in behavior. And behavior isn't just of the user that is using the website or the admin that is using the website, but we also want to focus on the behavior changes in the system itself. So let's say we want a cron job to run 2 times an hour instead of 1 time an hour because we want to achieve something. By focusing on those changes, we already start to describe the way that we want to implement them, right? So let's say the warehouse needs more often an update on a certain order. We already want to start describing that when a user places an order, the cron job should run more often to submit those changes. Here we already get requirements that we have to adapt the cron job in the system. So making sure that you focus on those changes, you can also easier test them later on because you changed a very specific thing and it first did this and now it does that. So that should be easy to test. And then make designs and style changes visual. And this one is super important and it's super easy to implement. Often, especially at the end of a project, the client still wants to have some small changes in colors, buttons, you name it. The margins aren't correct. They want it to be bigger, smaller, further away, closer, you name it. I'm sure you all had this issue before. What I do for every project is to get a designer involved, someone that has an Adobe XD or Figma file of the website, and it can actually do rapid prototyping. So when the client tells me I want the fonts to be bigger, I actually ask the designer first to quickly mock that up, and with tools like Figma or Adobe XD, that's actually pretty simple to do since you can connect style sheets as well. Show that to the customer and have them sign off on that first. Is this really what you want? Only then I'll send it to the developer, because you don't want to have the developer going in, changing stuff, coming back to the client. The client says, no, it still has to be bigger. And then you have to go back. That's a waste of your time. You're valuable people to be working on the project, and you shouldn't be going back and forth with your client. So big advice here, get a designer involved. And the next is talking about user acceptance testing. And this is something you do with the client as a project manager, you or product owner, or whoever takes the ticket from the customer. You should already be discussing the way they will want to be testing this, right? Because they already have an idea in their mind. Okay, when this ticket is done, I'm going to go in, I'm going to perform these and these and these actions, and I want to see this result. Including those steps in the issue, make sure that both the tester as well as developers and any other stakeholders involved already know what will be happening and already know what we will be testing for. And this makes sure that it's less ambiguous. This helps a lot with delivering exactly what the client wants. And then final, digging into complexity. And this one is tricky because this is where you start to expose the business logic that for the client is very logic to know, right? Like I said, the tie rips that should always come in bundles, or the car lubrication that should always come in 1 liter batches. But for us, that knowledge is new. Same goes for more complex things like how an invoice should be created and what happens to the invoice after it is created. Should it go to the ERP system? Should a copy be emailed to the client? Should something go to finance? We don't know. So event storming is this brand new approach on how to expose these issues. And basically you can see it as a UML diagram for non-technical users. You do it with sticky notes on a wall, or there's software to do it, of course, where you can do it interactive. And you go with the business, with the domain expert. This is the person that knows about this process. You go through the process on every step, and you explore what's happening when I do this, or what's happening after this, or what's happening after this, in a very natural way. So for them, it pushes them to think about the process and how they want it to work. And for you, you get an amazing insight in the requirements that they're actually looking at. So next, we have the bugs. We just talked about the features. Sadly, we also have bugs in our project, but how do we report those? So I think the first thing is using tools. This is something that your project manager might need, or your client or the product owner, and you can use them as well. So we start with something that is called a har file. This is something that a browser can make, and it shows all the requests that are done on the front end. This helps a lot when a client tells you that an image isn't loaded, or that a certain JavaScript isn't executed, right? You can see what's happening in their browser. Another one that does the same thing, but a bit more client-friendly, is LogRocket. LogRocket actually records each session of a user on the front end. And as soon as they report a bug, for example, via Zendesk, it includes that whole recording into the bug in Zendesk or in Jira, for example. And it actually allows you to go back into that session, look what was happening, and drill down in the DOM, in the JavaScript, and see where something goes wrong. And this means you don't have to hope that you can report an issue anymore. You can actually see what they were looking at. For me, that's very valuable. And then next, when it comes to design changes that are incorrect or something that they didn't expect, awesome screenshot. It's a free extension that you can, for example, use in Chrome. It makes a screenshot and it actually lets you annotate bugs and that kind of stuff. It's a simple tool, but it really helps. And markup.io does roughly the same thing, but a bit more advanced, right? You can input a certain screenshot or a certain URL, and start to annotate. And the best thing is you can work together on those things. So those tools will make your life a bit easier. But let's talk about what the issue should look like as well. So make sure for the client you have a template which describes that you want the title, that you want to have some steps that they went through, that you want to have screenshots or video, that you might want to have information about their environment, for example. By defining this template upfront and giving them some examples of issues that have been created before, it'll be easier for them to submit you the issues. And then last, reproduce the issues and verify before you actually start to work on them. And for this, I really recommend engaging a manual QA tester that can actually perform these bugs on a test environment or a live environment. Ideally, of course, a test environment. So you want to have someone that goes in that is an expert in testing, that can already look at different devices, that can already look at different environments and see what is happening there. And this way, if there's any information missing before they send it off, they can add that, so that we make sure that the developer that receives the issue, they actually have the full information and not just some issue with maybe 2 lines saying it doesn't work, because that's useless. It's a waste of time and everybody will get annoyed by that. So now let's take a look at the tools during development. Quality assurance isn't just something that you do as a step in Jira, right? It's not, I done a code review, now it goes to QA and let's see if it comes back. There are actually a ton of tools that you can use that help you with figuring out if you were doing the right thing. So one of the steps that you have to make sure you do is make sure your local environment is up to date. I see this happen often, where a developer is developing locally against an environment that is old, that is not up to date with the production environment, and they actually are missing some code, or they can't reproduce stuff because it wasn't there before. So make sure that you frequently update. And we'll get back to Git, which is very important in this story. Next is update all dependencies. Make sure Magento is updated. If not maybe the major versions, at least the minor versions, the security patches. Make sure PHP is updated. Make sure that you run Composer updates once in a while to update all the modules. And any modules that didn't come via Composer, maybe check it on their website if there is an update. Often you'll see that bugs that you're encountering with the client are already fixed by the module developers. So it's worth to check that once in a while. And then use Docker or something similar like Vagrant to emulate environments. This for me is a must on any project, right? Because you might have issues that you don't see on your Windows environment that might come up in the Linux environment, as well as easily switching between PHP versions, for example. There are a couple of very nice projects that are specifically created for Magento, such as Warden.dev, Meanbee Docker Magento 2, and Jeroen Boersma's Docker Compose development. And those environments can work with different PHP versions, different tools, already give you Blackfire, already give you a database to run with. So it makes it very easy to onboard a project quickly on your local environment. And making sure including the Docker Compose and Docker files in the repository also ensures that different developers work on the same environment between projects, so that you are sure that what you're seeing is the same thing that your colleague is seeing. And then last, like I already said, it's very important to always work with an up-to-date environment. And Git is one way of doing that. There is a wonderful talk by David Manners, Don't Be a Git. If you Google it, you'll find it, where he talks about how to use Git, how to use forks, how to use rebasing, etc. And it shows you the value of working on version control. Another couple of small things is make sure that you work with very small commits, right? Make sure that you commit 1 or 2 files with very specific changes and describe those changes very well in the commit. Work with feature branches. Per issue or per branch or per Jira ticket, you make a new branch and you commit your changes on that. And then work with pull requests to merge them back into the main branch. Last, make sure you have tag deploy versions. This means you have your own semantic versioning for deploys that you do for the client. This also means it's very easy to roll back to previous versions because you know what kind of versions you had before. So your version might be or your project might be on version 3.4 and you can roll back to 3.3 without any breaking changes. And next is the IDE, such as PHP Storm. Now, I'm not saying that developers should buy this themselves. I think this is up to the company to invest in, but it's worth it. It saves a lot of time and it actually prevents a ton of bugs. PHP Storm out of the box already catches so many issues that might go into production if you weren't using it. And then next to that, you can also configure PHP Storm to run with a various host of tools. So the best thing to do is to Google tools out of the box with Magento 2 and PHP Storm by Andra Lungu. That's a presentation given in Romania, and it goes very much in depth in how to configure PHP Storm to work with, for example, PHP Unit, but also PHP code snippers, such as PHP CS, PHP MD, PHP Stan, and Xdebug. Configuring these means that at any time when you're writing code, it will already in the background be checking the code that you're writing against known bugs, against the best practices from Magento, for example, right? If you want to do a query in your template, it'll already tell you that you shouldn't be doing that probably. So it's very useful. A PHP unit will run whenever you call it. So if you refactor a module and you want to see if it's still working, you just run PHP unit. Some other tools that I can highly recommend are Browser Stack, Mailhawk Docker Container, or Mailtrap. Mailtrap is a website used as an SMTP server, while Mailhawk is something that you install on the server, and they actually catch all the emails that are outgoing. This means that at any time you can see which emails are being sent without accidentally sending stuff to clients or whatever. They'll thank you for it as well. And then the last thing that absolutely helps with quality assurance is documenting changes in Confluence or changelog. So this can either be something like Confluence or just have a changelog.md in the root of your file, of your project, and update this file every time that you're making changes. This already helps a lot with understanding what was happening and where something went wrong. This captures the logic behind the changes that you're making. So you're explaining why you're doing something and not just what you're doing. And then last, team culture. There's a saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that's true. You can have the best quality assurance strategy, but if the team culture isn't there, if people aren't on board with it, you're going to fail. So having developer guidelines, that's a very important thing. Talk about environment usage, right? We use Docker locally, we have a development server, it's always up to date. How to use version control, so Git. How we deploy things, what kind of coding standards we are using. And this can be menial stuff from, do we put the accolade on the same line, to bigger stuff like how many lines should a method actually be before it becomes unreadable. It talks about dog feeding your own code, meaning what do you test yourself and what do you let QA test? The definition of done, when can you deliver something, and when can we mark it off the Jira board, and the definition of ready, which means, okay, I did this, it's now up for code review. Making these guidelines clear will ensure that teams are more easily onboarded because you can ask developers to read this. And it means that everybody's working with the same context. And then engage in discussions during sprint meetings. This one for me is very important. I've sat through many sprint meetings where basically the developers were agreeing with everything. right? The project manager would ask, okay, how long does this take? 13 points. Does everyone agree? Yeah, it's fine. And even if they didn't agree, we would say, that person said 8 points, that person said 10 points, so let's make it 9 points. That's not how to do that sprint meeting. Make sure you have discussions. Why do you think this is the best approach? How would you do that? Why do you think this only takes a day to fix? Make sure that you challenge each other so that you go to the core of the issue and that you see it from all perspectives, because that's the most important thing. During the sprint meeting, you can get input from every developer, and the input from a junior is just as valuable as from a senior. Once you're developing the feature yourself, you only have your own viewpoint. So at that point, you don't have your rubber duckies anymore to talk to. So challenge each other. And when you make the assumptions about code, right, this should only take a day because X or Y or Z, make sure to document that. And once you do the sprint retro, go back to those assumptions and check what you were talking about. Was it really what we assumed it would be? Did we underestimate the complexity? Why did it take longer than expected? So next, you have to be proud of the work that you do. That's very important, because it means that you'll take more care and more effort in what you deliver. If you're not happy with the work that you're doing, you'll never do a good job. When something does go wrong, perform a post-mortem. Go into that. And this is something that you can Google, and I'm sure a lot of examples will come up from big companies that you already know, like Google, like Atlassian does a couple. And they really dig into why things failed. So let's say a web shop goes down. Really dig into the issues that happened, and not just on the technical level, but also on a human level, right? If a mistake gets deployed into production, it's not the fault of one person, it's the fault of the entire team that didn't have the right procedures around it to catch such a mistake. So make sure you dig into that and you understand it so you can address it for the next time. This won't happen again because we took these and these measures. Also be brutally honest to each other, and maybe slightly less brutally honest to the client, but be honest. If something doesn't work, tell the client, tell them, okay, look, we underestimated it. We have to go back and we have to review it. Not doing so will make you hide mistakes that you've made. And at the end of the day, they'll come back to bite you. So it's worth to also call out your colleagues that might have deployed some code that they shouldn't maybe have, and tell them, okay, look, we have to be very proud of what we deliver. Why did you deliver such a interesting way of doing things, right? Be honest to each other. It really helps. And then keep repeating this. Have ambassadors who believe in the team culture, and make sure at every meeting they keep repeating these commandments, let's say it. Make sure everybody knows that this is the most important thing in the team. Now let's take a look, after we finally delivered all of our code, at the kind of bugs that we'll be facing, and actually the kind of testing that we want to do. Feature testing versus regression testing. So feature testing is, does new functionality work as intended, right? We had a Jira issue that described the new functionality, some changes in behavior that we want to achieve. Did we accomplish that? Next, is the code maintainable for that feature? Did we write code that will not break when we update Magento, or that is easy to read? And how well can we test that code? Are there unit tests? Is there an integration test? And can we test it on the front end? Well, for regression testing, we are looking at other things. Did we already break existing functionalities? And this we can test via a smoke test, which is basically a test suite that runs through the most important scenarios on the web shop. Can I order? Can I create an account? Can I put something in my wish list? Whatever the client thinks is important. Or we can do this by running a full test like the Magento Frontend Test framework. Next is performance negatively impacted. We can do this by running lighthouse scores, but we can also integrate, for example, Blackfire on our deploys, which will analyze each request of the page and see if we have negative performance impacts. Often what you see is that performance degrades slowly over time in a project because we make a little bit more changes, we do a little bit more concessions on speed, and between 1 and 2 months, you see that the performance goes down. By continuously monitoring that performance and acting on even a slow impact, even a minor impact on it slowing down, we can catch it early on and it doesn't have to be that much work to fix it. Then more on the UX side, did we complicate any of the user's journeys? Is it still easy to check out after making this change? Is it still easy to browse the website after we changed the design? This is a very important point. And did the code quality deteriorate? You can use tools like an npath complexity measurement tool or any of the other like PHPMD or whatever to make sure that the code quality doesn't deteriorate over time and keep it up to high standards. The next, automate all the things that you can. Terror is human, and that's why we automate. Humans get bored, humans are sloppy, humans might have, I don't know, a sick day or whatever, and they don't catch the bugs that they should have. So we can automate a lot of things that we already talked about on the PHP Storm, for example. We can use static code analyzers, we can use PHP unit, we can use the MMVS or Selenium or Cypress. Those are front-end testing tools that kind of headless fashion run through your web shop and see if they can still check out or add a product or whatever. And these things we can implement in the build server that we're using. So that could be Bitbucket pipelines, that could be Jenkins or any other build server that offers this kind of stuff. And it's often very easy to do with the configuration of a simple YAML file. Next, use the deploy tool. I can't stress this enough. Stop doing it manually. Don't use FTP or whatever. Make sure that you deploy everything from start to finish. So whenever you create a branch or merge to the development branch, an automated process is kicked off that takes the source code, that starts to generate all the virtual classes, that does all the compiling for you, that deploys it to the server, and it actually flushes the cache and so on. A one-click deploy. This will catch a lot of bugs, or this will prevent a lot of bugs that you might make while you are doing it manually. It also allows for rollbacks, and this is a very nice feature. For example, Deploy HQ. This is a tool that I use so now and then. You can go in and you can say, okay, that version I had 5 days ago, I want to deploy it again, and actually I want to deploy it on a new server so I can test something. These kind of features make it easy to test old stuff, to reverse the last deploy that you did that broke something. It'll take care of a lot of those issues for you. And then make sure that no manual intervention is allowed or necessary when you're deploying. So there isn't any configuration changes that you still need to apply or an update that you need to perform. Make sure, for example, when you set certain configuration changes in the backend, that you actually do it via an installer instead of doing it manual. This way, you don't even forget it. You don't have to think about it, it just runs. Then comes the code review. So this is after you deliver your code to on your feature branch, you make a pull request, and at that point you want to do a code review with the team. And the code review should be less on making sure that you don't make any bugs and more on focusing on sharing knowledge. For me, this is a great moment to learn from each other, to teach junior developers a bit more about the code that you're writing and so on. So first you focus on the readability of the code. Is it easy to read what people are saying? Can I follow it? Then the next one is, do the requirements match up with the delivered code? When you're doing your code review, take some time to maybe look at the issue, the Jira issue that is behind it, and does it make sense what they described there with what is actually delivered? Maybe the developer understood it wrong, or you don't agree with the way they delivered it. Does the code follow the best practices? Not all best practices can be tested as easily with a static code analyzer, and sometimes it makes sense to think about it a little bit. So was a helper used, for example, where there shouldn't be one used, right? In Magento 2, we try to steer clear of helpers, for example. Do all team members understand the code? No matter how complex it is, even a junior should be roughly able to understand the code that you wrote. Otherwise, you might have made it a bit too complex, or it could benefit from a couple of components or comments, or maybe some splitting it up into different components. Making it readable is not just good for now, but you'll also thank yourself half a year later when you have to go back. Then do we think it's an elegant solution? Do we think we can do this better? Did we maybe do it better in another project and you were unaware of that? So it helps to have the whole team, if it's not a team of 20 people, but up to 5 or 6 people to review every line of code written, just to get that input. Code reviews should be a discussion. Make sure that there's room for that discussion. Make threads of comments in Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab or wherever you host your code, and really take time to have that discussion. It isn't all about speed. You should also have the liberty to talk to each other over this kind of stuff, and maybe even take it offline to the water cooler or on Slack, whatever. Then front-end testing. Again, we're looking at features versus regressions. Test the final result of the delivery is something that you can do very well with manual front-end testing. Of course, we have the Magento front-end testing framework, but nothing beats a manual QA tester that is good at her or his job. So they can look at what was expected and what is actually delivered. Did something in design change? Did something break? Very valuable. Then document and test the results. Don't just have an Excel sheet somewhere laying around that you might make annotations in. Use a tool. We have in Jira the Canoa Test Manager, which I really like. You have TestLink, which is for free. It's an open source project. You can host it on any server. It doesn't look as slick as any of the other tools, but it works very well. And we have paid versions of, for example, TestRail and TCLab. And what these do very well is they allow you to create test suites, make whole scenarios in there, right? And also annotate if you find bugs. So at the end of the day, you can start to create reports on how often you might have regressions when it comes to the checkout, or every time we have bugs like this, we have a regression in the catalog. This kind of insight helps you to focus more on what you are doing while you're doing development. Like I said, manual testing adds value. A good QA engineer or manual click tester has experience that no script can replace, in my opinion. And then automating testing, right? For some stuff, it's easy to automate, actually allows you better to scale. Right? If you want to add a product to a cart, and you want to do that on 20 different devices, it might be easier to just do that automated, because otherwise you're going to need 20 click testers to actually execute that. So find the right balance between automating stuff and actually having a person going in and looking at the details and all that. At the end of the day, this all keeps the client happy, because we know for sure that what we deliver to the client is actually what we promised we would deliver, and it keeps them from calling us in the middle of the night because they're pissed off because it doesn't look like they wanted it to look. Then user acceptance testing, a very important step for the client, right? We hand it over to the client and they have to go in and tell us if they're happy. Guide the client in that process. scope what they will be testing. So talk to the client. We have this issue. You said you wanted to have this and this and this delivered. Is this still what you're going to test, or did your requirements change? Did you have a change of heart? Maybe you decided that after all you want to do it this way. So try to understand what they will be testing. Then demo the delivery. Don't just tell them that the delivery is ready on this URL and go edit. Take half an hour to call the client and tell them, look, we delivered this. This is what we worked on. This is how it works. Are you happy with that? This is what you expected, or were you expecting something else? This will already put them in a much better mood than them having to log into some URL and finding out it doesn't work on the first click. And make sure the UAT environment is prepared. Make sure it's a stable environment, right? No developers can touch it. You don't want to break stuff while the client is testing. It has test data. If they are testing the order view, there should be orders for them to test and not them having to go in and create that order themselves. And go through all the delivered features first. And this can be a QA person that does this beforehand, but make sure it works. Because if it doesn't work on the first click, you're going to lose the client in an instant. Doing these steps will have a tremendous impact on your team and your clients. It will for sure benefit the relationship you have with them. It will make the work for developers a lot happier. And I think it will make for very healthy projects in general. At least it has for me. I want to thank you for your time. These slides will be shared later on via either my Twitter or LinkedIn, so follow me there. And I'm looking forward to questions.
So I believe like we have a one question in the below panel.
All right. What add-on you recommend for PHP Storm with respect to developing Magento 2 projects? So I think the easiest way to go about it is to look at that presentation from Andra Lungu. She shared a lot of settings that she's using. Other than that, there is a module for Magento 2 in PHP Storm. It has been published by Magento itself that gives some help in class paths, for example, to resolve. Right, PHP Storm out of the box might not know about some virtual classes, and that plugin actually helps with that. What is your suggestion to make sure that the site performance is not beyond 3 to 5 seconds? So from a technical point of view, if we're talking about things that you shouldn't be doing, is avoid heavy queries and for each loop. So really think about the data you want to have on the front end and query once. Make sure that you craft your queries in a way that they make sense, right? If you know that you're looking for one result in a collection, put the limit 1 in that collection query. It'll already help with the performance. Other things are limiting the amount of front-end assets that you're downloading, of course, that helps a lot. Review the plugins that you're using or the modules that you're using in a project, right? Don't just throw any module that you found on GitHub in there, but really understand what it does and what kind of performance it does. And then once you have done that, make sure that you test this often. So use something like Blackfire. It has a free tier that you can already use for performance testing, even on your local development, and really see if something is changing in the tree it creates of those requests. Because often if you already see that there are many calls to a certain function or many loops or whatever, you can already kind of guess that the performance is going to be horrible. Next one, we should test our code before every commit or merge. What strategy should be used to reduce the testing time here, as test cases could take a lot of time to run? Yes, unit testing, running the full test suite takes a lot of time. You can make 3 cups of coffee, I think, in that time. What you want to do is have very granular test suites. So on Magento itself, you can specify a certain area that the unit test should run in, right? I just want to do the catalog unit test, for example. And this comes down to you understanding the change you made. So you had a ticket that said change something in the price or whatever, then you probably only have to check the catalog and you don't have to check the wish list, or maybe you do because it has to do with the price. So really understand what impact your code has. And then when you write tests yourself, also make sure that you create test suites per element, let's say. Even if you make a very big module, often I see that there's only one test suite for the whole module. You might want to break that up in smaller ones, and then you can say, I just want to run this, this, and this test suite, and that brings down the overall time. Any other open source IDE that can be used for Magento 2? I think Atom has gotten a lot better. I think there's also some new online editors that are quite interesting. Other than that, honestly, I'm not aware of them, but that's a very good question. What do you recommend the best tool for data migration? I'm not an expert there at all. I think there is a relatively official tool that you can use, but from my experience, I know that beyond the standard data that you're trying to migrate, as soon as a project already has a lot of changes and custom code in it, it's going to be a tough one. But honestly, I'm not the best person to probably recommend you any tool here. I'm sorry. I think that's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Sander, for your time, for the insightful session. So before jumping into any project, like all that said, the quality is the first thing we need to concentrate. Uh, thank you so much for choosing this topic and giving us, shedding your light more on this. And I hope like all the participants would have got an insight through this session. And so if they have any questions, probably you can just write me directly. I can consolidate all the question and I can send an email to Sandra on this. And thank you everyone for spending your valuable time in our Magento Master Virtual Series. And once again, thank you so much, Sandra, for your valuable time on Monday morning for giving a beautiful session and an insightful one as well. And so I, and meet you all in the next session in Magento Master Virtual Series Ashes with a wonderful Magento Master. And thank you so much. Thank you, Sandra.
All right. Thank you for having me.